As if you didn't get enough of me on the two videos, now you get to hear me talk a little bit. Hello, I'm Matt Stanford. Or I should say, hello, I'm Dr. Matt Stanford, just like in the video. So those are great videos, and Julia Koivuma, our marketing director, did a fantastic job putting those together, kind of helping us get the word out. I have a number of people to thank, but first I want to thank you for being here today and your generous support of the Hope and Healing Center. I'd like to thank Scott and Anna McLean, our chairs, and the Herculean effort they did to get you all here and to do this. I'd like to thank our honorary chairs, the Parnhams, for being here, and I'd like to thank Michelle Bain and the Special Events Committee for the work they've done planning, and Beth Woodman, Liz Crockett, and the staff of the Hope and Healing Center and Institute for all the work that they've done to really make this a very successful day. So it's my honor to be the CEO of the Hope and Healing Center and Institute. And we are, as I said on the video, a mental health resource for the community. We see over 500 people a week through our supportive services, and through events like this and through fundraising, we don't charge for our services, so people are able to get mental health services for free. I often say I think we may have the most diverse, economically diverse group of clients that we see, because we have people ride the bus over here from across town. We also see people that live right here in Tanglewood, so we have a real diverse group of people. But we are not satisfied with just being a successful mental health center or educational center or an institute that does research. What we want to do is we want to change the way that mental health care is accessed and delivered in this country by starting here in Houston, Texas. At this point, a majority of people, as I said on the video, receive no mental health care for those who are mentally ill. It's an unbelievable statistic. Most people don't even believe it, but the data is there. People with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, very serious mental illnesses, the majority of them receive no treatment in a given year. But people are more likely to go to a clergy member first before they see a mental health care provider or a physician. So that gives us a unique opportunity. That gives us an opportunity to train faith communities to be real front doors to the mental health care system, and an opportunity for them to access mental health care right in their neighborhood, and then for them to be supported long-term as they recover. Because another statistic that's very important that you know is that when people do get care, a majority of them do recover. And so people with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder can lead very high-quality lives and be very successful individuals. And we want to help with that. So we've started an initiative partnering with Miniger and Memorial Hermann. We're beginning to engage faith communities in the Houston area, training their clergy and their staff to recognize and how to make referrals, connecting them to a network of providers in the city that we're developing, with the hope that over 5 years we can engage hundreds of faith communities, school systems, and large businesses, and have hundreds, if not thousands, of places where people can access mental health care on a daily basis, get in to see a provider, and be supported long-term. So that's what is holding in the future for the Hope and Healing Center. And today we have some incredible people that are going to talk to you. I'm going to kind of try to stick this in here because I'm going to drop it if I don't. They're going to talk to you about mental health care. The advocacy for mental health care is an incredibly important thing. And we have two people today that are going to speak to you that are incredible advocates for those who have been broken by life circumstances. So first I'd like to introduce George Parnham to you. George Parnham is a soft-spoken attorney who once trained for the priesthood and was thus thrust into the national spotlight through representing such high-profile candidates as Andrea Yates and Clara Harris. George has practiced law for 37 years in Houston, specializing in criminal defense. Viewing law as a practical way to serve his fellow citizens, he has dedicated his life to the defense of the underdog. He's become an expert on the legal defense of individuals with mental illness and a passionate advocate for legal reform of their treatment in the criminal justice system. And one of the reasons that I really wanted to have George Parnham, who is just a really wonderful advocate for mental health care here, is another statistic that I like to say, that I hate to say, and one day I hope I don't have to say, and that is that there are 10 times more mentally ill individuals in prisons and jails today than there are in hospitals. And 44 of our states out of 50, the largest psychiatric facility is a jail. So I'd like to introduce to you George Parnham.
Thanks for that kind introduction. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and particularly to be able to share with you some of the insights that I've personally gained over 47 years of practice in the area of criminal defense law, specifically involving mental health and the criminal justice system. It's interesting that we start off with mental health in the criminal justice system as a result of normally a horrific act that places the individual that commits the act in the jail, so to speak, where that individual becomes a part of a population that comprises the largest mental health facility in the state of Texas, and that facility is the Harris County Jail. It's also very important to understand that in defending the mentally ill in the criminal justice system, one has to be able to look inside the mind of the individual that you're defending so that you can better understand the mindset of that person and the circumstances that that mindset created in causing that individual to commit an act that lands that person in the criminal justice system. I remember back in 2001, and I was recently sharing this with someone at my table, that when Andrea Yates on June the 20th, 2001, took the lives of her 5 children, it was a notorious, and the word sensational is in quotes, but the people in the city of Houston, in the state of Texas, in the United States, and as a matter of fact, in foreign countries, their attention was drawn to what happened at 942 Beachcomber, the home of Andrea and Rusty Yates and their 5 children. Looking into the area of mental health as it related to Andrea, I picked up a DSM and began to read about postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis. I had no earthly idea what that term meant. I think that as a result of Andrea's 2 trials, the last of which ended up in a not guilty by reason of insanity, that the level of awareness of postpartum issues has been given a boost. And now we find individuals that can openly talk on television about their own personal experiences with postpartum issues. And that educates the public to become more and more aware. What needs next to happen is that the state legislature has an absolute need for education in the area of mental health. I want briefly to read to you the definition of insanity in the state of Texas. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that because it just gives you an understanding as a criminal defense lawyer and you as a member of the public how difficult it is to defend someone in the criminal justice system who is severely mentally ill. Section 801, entitled Insanity, it's a defense to prosecution, affirmative defense, that at the time the conduct charged, the actor as a result of a severe mental disease and or defect did not know that his or her conduct was wrong, all right? And what happens is that the state, my adversary, on good terms for the most part, the state can take that definition and can in fact acknowledge that the individual that they're prosecuting was and is a severely mentally ill individual. No question about it. The only question is that did that person know what he or she is doing is wrong? They bifurcate the severe mental illness from the objective standard of knowing what you're doing is wrong. Now, I make an effort each time I select a jury, and I've made an effort, for instance, at the state legislature, to change the insanity standard to have it more reflect the mindset of the person who makes the decision to do the act, that the mindset of that individual who happens to be severely mentally ill, that decision-making processes are part of her world, her delusional world. She makes decisions based on what she perceives to be, and I say she, because we'll talk a little bit about postpartum additionally in a few minutes. She makes decisions on what she sees to be the need to correct an awful situation. And in Andrea's case, it was to save the souls of her children by taking their lives so that they would not grow up and be in the realm and the clutches of Satan and burn forever into eternity in hell. The fact that we don't give a jury a definition of what the word no means basically tells this jury that they can make a decision on whether or not the person charged knew what he or she is doing based on Webster's definition of what the word no means. And just in effect taking away the word no and the word wrong from the mindset of the person who's suffering from the severe mental illness. Pardon me. A while ago, back in 2002, Mary and I set about trying to find a nonprofit corporation that would establish a fund or foundation for the AIDS children, realizing that if, in effect, Andrea, who the state sought to put to death, elected to give her the notice of the death penalty, if that were to happen, and those children would have certainly have died in vain. We could not learn anything nor establish a legacy for the children who lost their lives at the hands of their mother. So eventually the Mental Health Association, after we were turned down by a couple of nonprofits, the Mental Health Association of Houston in 2002 established the YCMF, the AIDS Children's Memorial Fund. Since that time, we have published over 500,000 pamphlets. We train screeners to go out to the WIC clinics and screen moms. We have successfully treated, by way of referral, a number of mothers who have suffered from postpartum issues. Back in September of this past year, I was asked to come up to New York and give a presentation along with Dr. Meg Spinelli, doctor out of Columbia University. And Dr. Spinelli is an expert in women's mental health care. And the whole program that we participated in was videotaped. And we went through the trial process. And that videotape is soon to be released to public defenders' offices across this country. Another result of the legacy of the AIDS Children's Memorial Fund. I think that had Andrea been convicted, had Andrea been acquitted the first time in the first trial, that probably individuals would storm the state courthouse and storm the legislature in Austin, demanded that the insanity defense be eliminated. we saw that happen with John Hinckley. I think that as a result of her conviction and subsequent reversal at the First Court of Appeals, that the people began to understand life stressors, particularly on an individual mom who is raising 5 kids on her own mental health history. Andrea had been in and out of mental health hospitals, 2 suicide attempts. All of these factors come into being. Lastly, I would like to talk about the issue of motive. And motive is an extreme circumstance that often dictates to me whether or not I think the chances of an insanity defense can be successful or I should go another route, even though there is some issues concerning mental health. Motive means everything. In Andrea's case, Dr. Park Dietz, a forensic psychiatrist, took the stand, and on cross-examination, I asked him the question if he in fact was a consultant on NBC's Law and Order, and he said he was. And I said, did any of those episodes that you consult on have anything to do with women's mental health? And I knew that NBC wouldn't hire a doctor who had acknowledged that he had no expertise in women's mental health. And Dr. Dietz, to my great chagrin, said, well, as a matter of fact, one of those episodes dealt with a woman who drowned her children in a bathtub and pled not guilty by reason of insanity and was acquitted and went off with her husband, and that show aired in Houston shortly before Andrea did what she did on June the 20th. And I was stunned. The state used that testimony in cross-examination of our experts and in summation to the jury that Andrea Yates used this as a plan so that she could go away with Rusty, however bizarre that whole thing was, but that was motive. That was a motive. And we find out after the verdict that Dr. Dietz had not told the truth. Now, whether he did that intentionally or as he later testified, he was mistaken about that whole issue. But there was no Law and Order issue. There was no Law and Order show. There was no episode. And the First Court of Appeals reversed that case and brought that back to the fore. And now today we have Andrea Yates in a mental health facility, doing very well. And we keep in constant contact with her, but we always let her know that, and she wanted today for me to share with this group how important it is to her that her children's legacy continue in the area of mental health, and we're doing everything we possibly can to make certain that takes place. Thank you very much.
To show people. All right, well, if Scott McLean and Anna McLean and Amy Simpson will start making their way up here, I would like to tell you a little bit about our Chrysalis Award winner today. Amy Simpson, whether speaking in a microphone or through the written word, is a gifted communicator with a prophetic voice. She's the author of award-winning books Troubled Minds, Mental Illness in the Church, and Anxious, Choosing Faith in a World of Worry. They're both by InterVarsity Press. She also serves as a regular contributor for hermeneutics and an editor-at-large for Christianity Today's ChristianityTodayPastors.com. She's a good friend of mine. We have spoken many times around the country together at conferences on mental health and faith. Until I got to know Amy and we began to speak together, I kind of felt like I was alone in the wilderness crying out that people would help people with mental health, but now I feel I have a real friend to stand alongside me. So when we were talking about the Chrysalis Award this year, the first person that came to my mind was Amy Simpson. And the Chrysalis Award is given out every year. This is our 5th award by the Hope and Healing Center to a person who exemplifies an abiding Judeo-Christian spirit, demonstrates compassion towards others, and courage in meeting their own personal adversity. And I couldn't think of a better person this year to give the award to other than Amy Simpson.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, thank you. I am very honored to be here and very happy to be here. It's exciting for me to be part of these events where we are speaking openly about mental health challenges, about their impact on people, and about the need for hope. And very much about the need for Christians, the Christian community, for faith communities to come alongside people, enter into their suffering, and provide real hope to them. So I'm so honored and happy to be here. And I accept this award not only for my work, but on behalf of my family. And you know, I travel around and I speak on this topic pretty often, as Matt mentioned, and he and I have shared the stage a few times. And typically when I speak on this subject, I share a lot of facts and figures, I share a lot of statistics, I share some stories, some of the figures that you've already heard shared here today. But my most significant qualification for standing up here and speaking on this subject is not academic, it's not professional at all. It's actually very, very personal, because I know what it's like to love and live with someone who has a serious mental illness. So today what I want to do is just share my story with you. I grew up in the Midwest in a loving family with 4 kids. And until I was 13 years old, my dad was a pastor in small rural churches. So my family lived in the country. And I was a country girl. So when I was a child, when I wasn't reading, which was actually most of the time, I was outside enjoying the wide open spaces and running around in the fields and grasses that surrounded our house. We lived in parsonages right next door to these little country churches where my dad was the pastor. As I said, my family was loving. My mom was a gentle and kind person most of the time, but she was also unusual in some troubling ways. My mom had trouble reading books or following sermons and other presentations. Sometimes she had a hard time focusing on what other people were saying to her. And sometimes it was hard for her to start or even carry on conversations with other people. Sometimes she struggled to relate to other people or to express what she was thinking. She had a thought she wanted to share, and it just wouldn't come out in a way that other people could understand. She often couldn't express emotions, or she couldn't express them appropriately. And sometimes she said things that just didn't quite make sense to other people. Making decisions was very hard for her. And sometimes she showed surprising lapses in judgment. Now, one of the most striking things that I remember about her from my childhood was her social withdrawal. And she was socially withdrawn not only from the people around her, but from her own family. She would go off by herself, or she would sort of zone out, and she would be inaccessible to us for a time. She seemed distant at times, not all the time. And she didn't really have any close friends. In fact, I don't ever remember my mom really having truly a good friend in her life. But when you're young, you usually think your parents are pretty normal. In fact, probably the definition of normal, even if they're not. And although I knew that my family was a bit unusual for various reasons, I didn't think anything was truly wrong. I didn't understand there was a real problem until I was a teenager. When I was 13, my dad left his job as a pastor at the country church that we were at that time, and we moved to the city. And I'm not talking about the suburbs, I'm talking about right into the middle of a city. This was a big change for my family, as you can probably imagine. And the reason we decided to make a move like that was because my dad felt he could no longer be in pastoral ministry, and he felt like the best opportunity he had to find some kind of work was to move into the city. So that's what we did, but my dad was unemployed for a long time. And when he did find work, it was in temporary and minimum wage jobs that could not support a family of 6 like ours. Country pastors are not known for their wealth. That may surprise you. So my family had never had a lot of money, but now we were really living in full-on poverty. My family was living on public assistance. The whole family was dealing with culture shock at the same time. My parents' marriage was tense, and we were all tremendously stressed. At the same time that we made this major move, my brother, who's the oldest among my siblings, graduated from high school, and he left home. And my teenage sisters and I, who had all had our own rooms in the house we moved from, were sharing a bedroom. And you can imagine the conflict inherent in that situation. This was a difficult time for all of us, and these are normal circumstances that families sometimes have to adapt to. And eventually, my siblings and my dad and I made those adaptations. And we learned to thrive and even enjoy our new circumstances. But this was more stress and tension than my mother could navigate with her fragile mental health. She began to zone out more and more. She started behaving strangely in ways that confused and even alarmed us. She grew more fragile. Now, we all noticed this, and we worried about her, and my sisters and I got together for a conversation one day and kind of compared notes and said, we need to talk to Dad, something needs to be done. So we went to my dad and said, Dad, there's something wrong with Mom, and she needs some help. And he agreed with us. He had noticed the same things we had, and I think our conversation gave him permission to recognize what he had been trying to maybe ignore a little bit. So remember, this was an under-resourced family. We did not have resources at our disposal. But my dad was able to find a counselor who agreed to work with my mom for a few sessions on a pro bono basis. So my mom did work with that counselor, but frankly, like the rest of us, this counselor was in over his head and didn't recognize just how serious was the problem that my mom was living with. Well, my mom's troubling behavior grew worse until one day when I was 14, I was on the high school track team. And after school, I would go to track practice, and then my dad would pick me up on his way home from work. Well, this one day, I waited around for him to pick me up on his way home, and he didn't appear. So I waited for a while, and when he didn't come, I found a payphone because, of course, that's what we had back then. And I called home, and a neighbor answered the phone. Well, when I asked her what was going on and if somebody was coming to pick me up, she told me kind of in a frantic way, your mom had to go to the hospital, your dad went with her, I think she had a stroke or something. So I walked home from school that day. And it was a walk I had made before. It was a couple of miles, through the city. It was actually kind of an interesting walk. So I didn't mind very much, but that day, I did. And I specifically remember the walk that day because it seemed to take forever. And I was very worried that whole time walking home and wondering what had happened to my mom. Was she terribly sick? Was she dying? Had she died? I was 14. I hadn't given a lot of thought to what strokes were. And I didn't really understand, but that word kept going through my mind that my mom had had a stroke. And I wondered what happened to people who had strokes. I knew they were serious. Would I see her again? Had I lost her that day? Well, as it turned out, my neighbor's report was wrong. I had lost my mom that day, but not to death or even to the physical consequences of something like a stroke. My mom had suffered a fully debilitating psychotic break and had gone to a psychiatric hospital. Now, later I found out that this was not my mom's first psychotic episode. She had actually had many of them over many years. But they had been hidden and kept out of sight. She had been able to function just well enough that we hadn't been aware of just how serious her condition is. So this was just the first time that she had been absolutely disabled by her psychological condition, unable to care for herself at all. And much later, I learned that what I had lost her to was called schizophrenia. And I would lose her again, many more times in the years to come. Now, it was many years before we really understood my mom's diagnosis, but schizophrenia became a new member of our family that day. It changed the way we all lived. My mom was hospitalized multiple times when I was in high school, and each time she returned home with bottles of pills that controlled most of her symptoms. They really helped her a lot. But they made her miserable with their side effects. She hated taking them. But she took them anyway, and she sat on the couch staring into space while our family's life went on around her. And then when she started feeling a little bit better, she'd start shuffling around the house, doing what she could to care for her family. And eventually, when she started feeling even better, she would decide eventually that she didn't need to take those pills anymore. So the cycle would repeat itself, and we learned to live with her and without her. When my mom was home, we cared for her. We let her care for us the best she could because that seemed important to her, and it was important to all of us. We wanted a normal family, and we loved her. But we didn't really have the luxury of needing her, so we didn't. Neither did we have the luxury of seeking sympathy or support in the people around us. We knew very well, as everyone does, that we weren't supposed to talk about mental illness. We got the message that we were alone. We were worthy of shame. We were supposed to pretend everything was fine. So that's what we did, and we got pretty good at it. When I was 15 years old, one day, my mom picked me up after school, and she had been doing pretty well at that time, well enough to be able to drive and to take us places that we needed to go. And so she picked me up that day because I had a dentist appointment, and she was going to take me there to the dental office. Well, as soon as I got in the car with her, I knew something was wrong. And you might imagine my radar was pretty good at this point. I was very much in tune with the signals that told me that my mom wasn't doing well and was maybe headed for another episode. So that day I could tell right away that she wasn't functioning normally. She drove nervously. It was as if she were struggling to be fully aware of her surroundings, or maybe imagining surroundings that weren't actually there. She was silent except when I forced conversation with her, and when she did speak to me, her speech was slow and seemed to require a lot of deliberation. Her interaction with me was indirect and stiff. It was as if she were not fully aware that I was there, which was scary for me, partly because she was my mom and partly because she was driving the car. She seemed to be fading into some unknown place, and as if there was a half of her that was not sure whether to follow or to maintain her grip on the reality of her daughter and a mundane trip to the dentist. Well, I know I was 15 at the time because I remember vividly thanking God that I could legally take over driving if I needed to, because I had my learner's permit. And I don't know why that seemed so important to me at the time, but it provided me a sense of security. And I also remember asking my mom whether she had taken her medication that day. Now, she wasn't straightforward in her answer to me, but it was clear to me that she was not fully medicated and stable. So with one part of my brain, I asked God for a safe trip to the dentist. And with another part, I employed a technique that I was pretty good at that point in my life, and it's used by many people who feel powerless in the face of an unnamed enemy. I soothed myself by acting as if nothing was wrong. Well, we did make our way safely to the dental office, and we sat down to wait in the waiting room. And when my name was called, I left my mom there and went back for my appointment. And when I did that, I stepped out of my anxiety about her for the moment, as I usually did when I was away from her. That was part of my strategy for coping with a devastating stress I didn't understand and didn't know how to deal with. So when I was away from her, I really didn't think much about the problems in my family. So after half an hour or so with the dentist, being a normal 15-year-old kid, I returned to the waiting room and I approached my mom, who didn't look at me. "Mom, it's time to go," I said. "I'm finished." And I received no response from her. And suddenly, in a moment, I realized my earlier instincts had been right. And my fear had been realized. Something indeed was wrong with Mom again, and it was up to me to help her. I touched my mom's arm, and I gently tried to shake her to awareness with no result. And when I touched her, I realized She was not only non-responsive, she was rigidly catatonic, immobile, staring into space, stiffly clutching her purse in her lap with clenched hands, in a waiting room full of strangers. Well, after a couple of quiet attempts to rouse her and get her attention, I began to attract the attention of the other people in that room, who sat and stared at me as I tried to get my mom to respond. If I could just get her to the car, I thought. I could take her home, or I could take her to the hospital or wherever. I just need to get her out of here. But when she wouldn't move or even respond to me, I realized that wasn't going to happen. I was not going to be able to get her to the car. So the only thing I could think to do was to call my dad for help at work. So with everyone in the room continuing to stare, I walked over to the reception desk and I asked the woman behind the counter, who was also staring, if I could use the phone. She pointed and said, "No, there's a payphone around the corner." Well, I explained that I needed to call my dad for help and that I didn't have change for the phone and that it would be a local call. She still refused and pointed me to the payphone. So I walked back to my mom, and in a very undignified moment, I wrestled with her rigid arms to get into her purse, just to get a quarter for the phone so I could get some help. I went back to the receptionist to ask her if she could just keep an eye on my mom while I used the payphone, and she shrank back in horror. "Is she dangerous?" she asked. Well, I assured the receptionist that my motionless, non-responsive mother was not poised to attack her, and I called my dad. And he basically worked on what was kind of a factory floor situation, so he was not easy to reach. And it took several minutes for me to get a hold of him, but when I finally spoke with him, he assured me he'd be there as soon as he could be. So I went back to sit next to my mom and wait for him to arrive. And while I waited, the receptionist and the people in the waiting room took turns staring at my mom, glancing at me, and studying the floor. And not one person in that room asked me, a completely rational 15-year-old kid, if I needed any help. Now, eventually, you'll be happy to know one of the dentists became aware that something was happening and did come out and offer some help and support. And my dad showed up, and we were able to get my mom to the hospital and get her the help she needed. But in the years since then, I have often thought back to that incident, not only as a traumatic incident in my life, but as a reference point for attitudes toward people with mental illness and their families. The way people in that waiting room responded to my family's public crisis is the way I've seen people tend to respond to serious mental illness. To them, my mother was someone to be feared, and I was somehow infected by my association with her. The people around me, I have no doubt, felt helpless and fearful. Maybe they even wanted to help, but they didn't know what to do, so they refused to get involved. And I knew my mother's illness was a shameful secret, and my family was alone. Fast forward several years to the day I graduated from college. It was a rainy day, but a happy one. My friends and I wore shiny blue caps and gowns, our tassels swaying in the wind, our eyes shining as we looked toward the bright future. Now, because of the rain, colorful umbrellas bobbed through the crowd like party balloons, and they sort of lended to the festive atmosphere that day. No more school, I kept telling myself. No more papers, tests, grades. I had my college degree, and it was time to do something with it. I had a job lined up. I was a newlywed. I was already settled in an apartment that my husband and I had moved into after our wedding a few months earlier. The future felt like a wide open door to a new country. My husband was with me that day, cheering me on as I had done for him at his graduation ceremony 2 years before. My best friends were there. Most of them were in the same graduating class and making plans of their own. My parents had driven 500 miles to celebrate with us and to show their pride in another college graduate in the family. In spite of the rain, we all smiled and snapped photos and pinched ourselves to make sure we had really made it after all. But all that day, I was troubled. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't miss the signals. That familiar, faraway look that I saw in my mom's eyes. That stiff half smile on her lips that told me she wasn't all there. And although I had spent my teenage years trying, I had never been able to escape the emotional devastation that came with seeing that look, because I knew what it meant. I knew that sometime soon, perhaps very soon, we would lose her again. And I was right. The next morning, after graduating and celebrating with my friends, my husband and I got out of bed and wandered out of our room to spend some time with my parents before they left home. They had spent the night at our apartment. We found Dad hovering over Mom, trying to rouse her. She lay where she had slept, awake, but again, catatonic. After about an hour of gentle and persistent work on our part, she began responding to our insistence that she engage with reality. We walked her through the basics. Open your eyes, Mom. Move your arms. Move your legs. Sit up. Slowly, step by step, she revived, and eventually she shuffled her way to the car, and my parents drove home. A day or two later, Dad called to say Mom was back in the hospital. And we weren't surprised by this news, but we grieved as we had so many times before, and would do many more times. Once again, schizophrenia had stolen the precious person who had gently cared for me when I was sick, held me when I was sad, and taught me about Jesus. Her symptoms came in cycles and waves, and this wave cast a shadow over a new stage in my life. After the joy of getting married, graduating from college, and landing my first career job, that long process of gradually leaving home, I found I couldn't really leave the grief of repeatedly losing my mother to delusions, paranoia, and incapacitation. Now, as the years marched on from there, my family continued to walk through decades that brought a string of run-ins with the harsh effects of my mom's disease, difficult and broken relationships, paranoid fear, many hospitalizations, public embarrassment, religious confusion, occult activities, homelessness, danger, arrest and conviction, prison time. Periods of stability and hope followed by another slow or sometimes sudden loss of the person we know and love. Battles with the shame and stigma that kept us quiet and isolated even from each other for decades. Battles for the life and well-being of a woman we cherish, who still has a purpose and a place in this world. Now, adulthood did give me the distance I needed to safely sort through my childhood experiences and to loosen my grip on self-protection. I saw a counselor, the first person I ever told about the most painful realities of my life in the shadow of schizophrenia. She didn't belittle my pain. She didn't administer testing to gauge my own psychological disturbance. Instead, she said with tenderness, "You lost your mother." And for some reason, I had never thought of it that way. And her words gave me a framework to understand the repeating cycle of loss and grief that our family endured. They freed me from the sense that I hadn't done enough, that in my reluctance to repeatedly reattach myself to a mother who kept fading, I had somehow let her down. This counselor began to set me free from shame. Later, I saw another counselor who took it a step further and helped me explore the idea that I had more to offer the world than simply proving I was mentally competent. That part of my calling in this life is simply to be me, and that opening up does more than expose me to pain. It offers a gift that God meant for me to share. And I needed that permission because I had been self-protective for a long time. A third counselor helped me take another step. She graciously walked me through symptoms of serious and chronic mental illness to help me arrive at the conclusion that I was not ill. You see, I had identified so strongly with my mother that I feared that I would develop a serious mental illness at any point. So she took me seriously, and she took the time to reassure me on that point. Yet she also helped me embrace other truths about myself. I am weak, vulnerable, fragile. Those are things that I had been very afraid to be. These conditions are not incompatible with normal life, as I had thought. They are definitive to normalcy. They are realities I must accept if I'm also to accept God's unconditional love. But my own growing emotional health did not soothe my sorrow over Mom's ongoing struggle with schizophrenia. In fact, as I grew encouraged to face my pain, my awareness of pain intensified. I met my friends' moms at weddings, baby showers, and birthday parties. I saw what a relationship between an adult woman and her mother could be like. I agonized over what to tell my children about their grandmother. I wondered whether to blame or pity Mom when her choices caused trouble for herself or others because of the symptoms of her illness, and I waited with shallow breath for the next time her medication would fail or she would stop taking it again. Then one day, Mom left home without a word. For more than a month, my family followed clues that led us far enough to guess she had found shelter, but privacy laws blocked our efforts to confirm where she was. I lay in bed at night, prayers mingling with images of terrible things happening to my mom. After some family friends spotted her at a homeless shelter where they were serving a holiday meal, my sister went to visit. My mom didn't know who she was. Well, eventually she came home and she crawled back toward reality. Shopping with my dad one day, she stood in the aisle that was displaying the picture frames, and she stared at the smiling families in those frames. She asked him this question: "What's family?" She knew the word was significant, but she couldn't remember what it meant. And we had to teach her again. About 8 years ago, I was riding with some coworkers to an off-site meeting when my husband called me and told me that my mom had been arrested for a crime that she committed when she was off her medication and living homeless. Through her trial, conviction, and prison time, all we could do was write letters substantiating her health history and begging for the treatment she needed, which she eventually received in prison. The day I saw my mom's bewildered face on the Department of Corrections website for her state was among the saddest days of my life. But that was the day when God finally helped me understand that her experience was not mine, that I didn't need to be ashamed or afraid to be her daughter. Her story didn't define me. At the same time, the truth about her was no uglier than the truth about me. Well, one day my family's story, my personal faith, and my work as a writer came together. I was working at a company called Christianity Today, a Christian media company, where I was a vice president. And this one day I was getting ready to leave the office, and for some reason I stopped by the office of Marshall Shelley, who was the editor of Leadership Journal, a publication for clergy. And I'm not someone who typically speaks before I think. In fact, I'd say I almost never am that person. But in this particular instance, before I knew it, I was blurting out something like this: "Hey, if you ever want someone to write about mental illness in the church, let me know." What? I blame the Holy Spirit for that one, because that didn't come from me. I had a very little willingness to actually do this. So he asked me about my interest in this subject and what I knew about it, and I told him a little bit about my family story. And he assigned me an article on the spot. And I went home wondering what in the world I had just done. But I got my parents' blessing, and I felt called to do this. So I found myself writing about the one subject I had been sure I would never write about. You remember, at this point, I had spent decades with the rest of my family keeping a family secret, being ashamed of my mom's illness, and suddenly I was going to share it with the world. So I did it. And after the article received a huge response from readers, I grew more courageous. And I began to feel a strong push to write a book, not just about my family's story, but with the goal of calling churches to take their rightful place in the mental health care system. And I began to understand at that point just how powerful it is to simply share our story. With fear and trembling and a lot of tears, I worked my way through Troubled Minds, a book that tells some of my own family's story, shares many other people's stories, that helps clergy and other people of faith understand more about why faith communities are so important in this arena and what we can do to help. And in the years since then, I've found myself on stage many times, sharing stories, helping to educate, giving ideas. I have had the precious privilege of being there when countless people realize for the first time that they are not alone. I have seen the burden of isolation lift from their shoulders, and it's a beautiful sight. You talk about hope. I have seen God redeem my family's pain by using it to bless others and help others recognize their calling. I never dreamed I would have an opportunity like this one. Last week, I actually got to watch my mom receive an award for her role in helping to fight stigma around mental illness. She won that award for allowing me to tell her story. It was an incredible moment for my family, for my mom to actually be rewarded for this thing that had been the greatest source of pain and suffering in her life. A couple of years ago, after my mom had relapsed and stopped taking her medication, she spent several months living in a secure assisted living facility. We were very grateful for this place, which was a facility that actually specializes in Alzheimer's care and other people who have memory issues. But they were willing to take my mom with her severe mental illness in a very debilitated condition and give her a safe place to come back to health. Well, my family was visiting at Christmas time, my husband and my kids and I. And we went to meet some of her friends while we were there. And I'll be honest, when I walked into that building, all I was thinking about was how grateful I was that this place had given my mom a home for several months. You know, when she first came there, she was so ill, she didn't know her real name. She used a variety of names. She was too afraid to sleep in her room at night by herself. So they let her sleep where she wanted to. And she chose to sleep on a bench outside the doors of the chapel in this facility. And eventually she got better and better while she was there. Well, at this point, she was doing relatively well. But I was just so grateful that she had been given this place to recover. And my attitude was changed by the time I walked out of there. My eyes were opened. When we went to meet some of my mom's friends, one of them told us about the tremendous influence that my mom had on the other residents there. Because of her, he said, the other residents had more hope and joy in their lives. Because of her, people felt listened to, because she was willing to listen to them. They felt like they had a friend in her. My mom had made a difference in this place simply because she was there. And I realized she was there for far more than just to get better. Her life had a purpose in that place, and people were seeing Christ in her. This experience took me by surprise and taught me something important which I didn't realize I needed to learn at that point. My mom was there to bring love and light into that place regardless of her illness. She was there because of her illness, and God used her there. I believe everyone's life has a purpose, and my mom's purpose was not canceled because she has a serious illness. For me, the shame is gone. I'm not embarrassed of my mom's illness. I'm proud of the ways she's living with it. Schizophrenia may still do more brutal work on this woman, but my eyes will stay open. I'm no longer afraid to be like her or to take the emotional risks inherent in loving her. I take heart and find hope in my belief that mental illness does not make anyone marginal to God's plans. I believe God sees every single person for who we are and loves us all more than we can imagine. Now, we can extend that same kind of loving vision toward one another. Regardless of our mental health, we are all equally valuable in God's eyes and all equally important to each other. People with mental illness, like all people, are precious. The work of people like the folks at the Hope and Healing Center matters to so many people, to so many families like mine, who need to know they are not alone, who need to find hope in what seems like a hopeless situation. And I'm so grateful to know that this ministry organization is here and that you all are here to support its work. There is hope. Let's help people find it. Thank you so much for your time.
Wow, boy, that was incredible. Amy, thank you so much. And I would just, George, thank you so much for your words. Such a special treat to be able to have such a closer connection today to mental illness and to both of your stories and all the folks you've interacted with. So let me just ask everybody again to please help recognize Amy and George. You know, this Hope and Healing Center, it really is a very special place. I think you don't even need to talk about it. You can just kind of feel it. I think we've used the word hope a lot today. So Anna and I have a hope, an aspiration, and that is that something about today, this time we've had together, will allow everybody in the room to create maybe a little closer connection with mental illness. It's in all of our families. It's in our friends' families. We all encounter it in different ways, and such real sharing about it. You know, our hope is that it'll give us all the strength to talk about it and to seek help, and both in our families and for our friends. And our hope also is that that knowledge and that relationship and that connection will allow you to do something also. Not just something for you, but something for others. And I think no matter what faith, there got to be a lot of faiths here in the room today, no matter what faith someone comes from, almost all faiths have in common the concept of something greater than ourselves, and certainly the concept of others and the importance of doing things for others. And so I don't know what it is that maybe helped your personal connection today. It certainly had to be the words of George and Amy, the beautiful prayer by Jim, Matt's comments, the wonderful staff that works here at the Hope and Healing Center. I'm going to ask them to stand real quickly. Matt acknowledged them, but all the staff at the Hope and Healing Center, if you all would stand just quickly, I'd like to acknowledge you all. Thank you. You know, I don't know if it's how the thing began, the fact that it began from a simple sentence on a piece of paper, the collective aspiration of I don't know how many respondents to that survey, probably 3,000-4,000 respondents to that survey, that their number one hope was that a center like this could come and be a blessing in people's lives. I don't know if it's the wellness programs, or perhaps even the fact that it's such a conduit during a time of crisis, or again, maybe it's just the fact that it's faith-based. So our hope, Anna's and my hope, is that your connection is even closer today, having been here, and in the spirit of sort of doing something about it. You've already committed significant financial resources to this center and to this luncheon. And there is an opportunity, this is called the Oklahoma Shakedown portion of this luncheon, and I think that's somehow why Anna and I were asked to do this. But anyway, there is a card in your program, and you're not going to have to do something with it right now. You don't have to do something with it in front of all the other folks around your table. There's two silver trays back here. If you want to, right back by the doors, if you want to make an additional contribution, that's terrific. If you want to take it home and pray about it, that's like maybe even more terrific, because prayer and then ultimately how we spend our time and our resources, there's a powerful connection there. So I don't want you to feel like you got to get up and go write something down and everybody's got to watch you do that. You don't have to. If you want to do it that way, do it that way. If you don't want to do anything, don't do anything. Just your being here is important. And if you give another $5 or you give $5,000, I think we'll all walk away from here going, wow, this place makes a difference, as do so many others that are working in our community related to mental health. The last thing I'm going to close with is that we had a dinner in here one night, and by the way, the Hope and Healing Center, it got started through St. Martin's, but it's it's a citywide, statewide, national organization now. St. Martin's is just blessed to be in the life of it, but it is not part of St. Martin's. It's a separate organization, and the funding of this organization ultimately will be dominated by folks that have nothing to do with St. Martin's. So we're here, and I want to make sure that's really clear. But one of the former bishops of the Episcopal Diocese here, Claude Payne, we were having a capital campaign. Many of you all were here that night. And he said, hey, there's three reasons why you need to give generously to this capital campaign. And this was the bishop, so we were all kind of paying attention and up on the edge of our chairs. And I don't remember, Lee, if it was the first or the third, but the one that left a lasting impact on me was he said, have you ever missed a dollar you gave away? Have you ever missed a dollar you gave away? And I can think of vacations I probably could have missed, or dinners I could have missed, or presents I bought for people that they could have missed just fine. But have you ever said, God darn it, I wish I hadn't given that money to that charitable cause. I wish I had that money back. Never happens. Never happens. Have you ever missed a dollar you gave away? So we're going to end. You're like, man, would you wrap it up? Anna's giving me the hook right now. But those envelopes are there, and if you want to make a gift, that's terrific. I'm going to ask R.J. Heineman to close us in prayer, and thank you very much for being here.
Hi, I'm going to offer two brief prayers from the Episcopal Book of Common Prayer. One is for the sick, and one is for those who serve. And I loved what Jim Jackson said in the beginning. Both of those are all of us, right? I remember the line from Thornton Wilder's play, The Angel That Troubled the Waters, who said, in love's service only the wounded may serve. And we are wounded, and it's out of our woundedness that our service comes. So here are those two brief prayers. First, for the sick. Heavenly Father, giver of life and health, comfort and relieve your sick servants, and give your power of healing to those who minister to their needs, that those for whom our prayers are offered may be strengthened in their weakness and have confidence in your loving care. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. And for those who serve. Heavenly Father, whose blessed Son came not to be served, but to serve. Bless all who, following in his steps, give themselves to the service of others, that with wisdom, patience, and courage, they may minister in his name to the suffering, the friendless, and the needy, for the love of him who laid down his life for us, your Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.